This is a 2002 Renault Sport Clio V6, and it's one of the craziest hot hatchbacks ever made. It may not look too insane on the outside, but this is smaller than a Mini Cooper and has a mid-engine V6. Yes, that's right, this little hatchback is actually a mid-engine V6 powered rear-wheel drive sports car. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Porsche 928, which brought over $30,000 with low mileage. This Ferrari California brought more than $123,000. And this fantastic E60 BMW M5 sold for almost $26,000 with a 6-speed manual transmission. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with great selection and daily auctions at carsandbids.com. So let's talk Clio V6. This car was never sold in the United States, but I have always wanted to review it, and I have finally gotten the chance thanks to the Lane Motor Museum here in Nashville, Tennessee. The Lane Museum has some unbelievable cars, a truly fantastic collection that includes this Clio V6. And if you're in the Nashville area, I highly recommend checking out the Lane Motor Museum and seeing the amazing cars. You can learn more about the Lane Motor Museum by clicking the link in the description below. Now, the Renault Sport Clio V6 came out in 2001, and it's based on the regular Renault Clio, which was just a tiny, unassuming French hatchback, but this was anything but. The regular Clio's tiny little 4-cylinder engine was gone, replaced instead by a 3-liter V6 in a car that's a foot shorter than a Mini Cooper. The earlier models, like this one, had about 230 horsepower, and they could do 0 to 60 in around 6 seconds. Later ones got a boost to about 250 horsepower, which brought 0 to 60 down into the 5s. But the craziest thing about this car is the placement of the engine. Like I said, not up front like every other high-performance hatchback. Instead, it's in the middle. They took out the back seats and they put the engine back there, and then they converted it to rear-wheel drive. So this is a mid-engine rear-wheel drive sports car, kind of masquerading as a hot hatchback. Now, these are very rare. Renault only sold about 3,000 of these from 2002 to 2005, and like I said, never sold in North America. I've never seen one of these before in my entire life. And now I'm going to review this Clio V6. First, I'll take you on a tour of it and show you all of the interesting quirks and features of one of the most interesting hot hatchbacks ever made. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Clio V6 with undoubtedly its biggest quirk, and that would be the fact that the engine is back here in the back, technically mid-mounted. Now, to get to the engine, first you open up the tailgate like you would in any other hatchback or crossover. You open it up, and then you can see a massive hump back here instead of a cargo area, and obviously under that hump is the engine. Now, like I said, the regular Renault Clio is just a traditional economy car with back seats. This thing ditches the back seats, and they have the engine back here instead. 3-liter V6 with about 230 horsepower mid-mounted. Now, this whole thing is pretty impressive. In addition to ditching the back seats, the regular Clio is a front-engine, front-wheel drive car. This is a mid-engine, rear-wheel drive car, so the sheer amount of changes necessary to convert a regular Clio into this is just completely mind-blowing. But anyway, let's talk about getting to the engine. Now, you've already completed step 1 by opening up the tailgate. Next, you have to take off this plastic panel that you see here, this trim piece, and you sort of unscrew these 2 little clasps that are holding it in place, and then you can remove this panel completely, which gives you a little bit more access back here. Now, under this first panel you've just removed, you have a second panel that you can see, and there are several different metal clasps. You have to undo each one of those. There are 8 total, and once you've you've unscrewed all of those, then this second panel can be removed, lifted off, carried away, and then you have the engine. There it is. Yes, it's really back here. A 3-liter V6 mounted in a car that is smaller than the Mini in the interior. What a truly bizarre thing to see, but there it is. About 8 inches away from the seats. Yes, there's a firewall between you, but that is incredibly close, and what a crazy design. Now, as you can see, even with these panels off, the ones I've removed, engine access is a bit of a disaster. This is nowhere near as easy as opening up a hood and having all of that room to work on stuff. You really have a tough time getting to things back here. The engine is still kind of shrouded by plastic and trim, and I suspect to do major servicing and maintenance, you'd have to pull off a lot more than the stuff that I just took off, which gives you access to kind of only the basics of the engine. And even then, it's a little difficult to reach. And with the engine back here, in addition to it being hard to access, you'll lose a lot of the hatchback practicality. You can see there's basically no cargo area except for directly above the engine hump. And that's like at the top of the cargo area. If you put anything back here, it would block your visibility. Directly behind the engine, you only have a couple of inches for stuff. You can't exactly throw like suitcases back here and drive off like you would in any other hatchback. So in going mid-engine, this becomes insane and very impressive, but it kind of loses the practicality that you normally associate with a hot hatchback. And by the way, speaking of that practicality, you will note that cargo room is robbed even further with this little black plastic case that's mounted in the cargo area. You undo the straps for this case, open it up, and you'll see some tools in there. Namely, you have a jack for changing a tire, and you also have the towing eye that you can screw into the car in case you need it to be towed. But that takes up even more of your cargo space. You're really not left with all that much back here. Such is life with a mid-engine hatchback. What a crazy thing. But anyway, since we've covered the engine in the back, next up something I have always wondered about this car since I discovered that it existed. If they've moved the engine to the back, what exactly is up front? They got all this space. What have they done with it? We're gonna find out right now. First thing, you pull the hood release and the footwell inside. You pull that and it pops the hood open to here, and then you release the hood just like in any other normal car, and you can see it is storage. You have a relatively large storage compartment up here, actually. No surprise because, well, the engine is gone. It's in the back, so you have more room in the front to put stuff. Now, obviously, this doesn't give you back all of the hatchback storage that you lost by putting the engine in the cargo area, but you do get a pretty generous amount of cargo space up here. So anything you couldn't get in the back or into the passenger seat, you can stick up here, and that gives you some practicality, and it gives you a little bit of your hot hatchbackness back. By the way, the plastic surrounding this former engine compartment must have been made specifically for the Clio V6, since it wouldn't have been used in any other car, and it's kind of an interesting piece with all these rather unusual cutouts. In fact, inside it almost looks like one of those plastic hot tubs that has like seats at different angles kind of jutting out, because it has little different places where I guess there must be mechanical stuff underneath that the plastic can't really go. But that is your front cargo area in the Clio V6, just in case you, like me, have wondered what happened when they moved the engine to the back. And next up, since I'm outside the Clio V6, I want to talk about another amazing change made to this car, and that would be widening it, because this car looks and is a lot wider than a regular Clio, but they went about it in a rather unusual way. If you've seen Renault Clios before, you'll know that the inner part of this rear end is just a regular Clio. It has the same tailgate from a regular Clio and the same brake lights from a regular Clio. In fact, it really just looks like a regular Clio that's had a bit of a growth. And it looks like that because that's exactly what this is. The body kit on the back here is just epoxied or stuck on to a standard Clio fender, and you can see that everywhere you look. When you see the seams between the body kit and what would be the normal Clio, you can see it just sort of sticks on top of it. They didn't create a new body for the Clio V6, they just stuck new fenders over the top of the regular Clio body, and that's clear on the outside. On the seams on the body kit, you can see it's just kind of stuck on there on top of a standard Clio rather than creating new fenders, which is something I never really knew before. And it's the Same deal on the door panel. The rear end has to be wider for obvious reasons. There's a new engine back there, but they couldn't just make the rear only be wider, so there's also a body kit attached to the door. So you have the regular Renault Clio door with a body kit, like epoxied or bonded or screwed in there, whatever. It's just a body panel stuck on top of another body panel, and that's what they did in the rear and for the door. Now, it's worth noting it doesn't look like that's what they've done up front. It looks like the front fender of the Clio V6 is actually a distinctive panel for this car. It doesn't look like there's any body kit like plastered on top of a normal Clio front fender, but everything else for this car, it's not a totally bespoke different body that they created. They just kind of slapped a wider looking body on top of a regular body. I love that ingenuity. Now, in addition to a wider body down the side of the car, it's worth noting Renault also put on a completely different body kit in the rear end, especially on the bottom below the bumper. You can see these massive central exhaust tips sticking out from the car. This is factory, and it looks really cool and really mean. And the wide body look in the back of this car really was a very muscular, distinctive feature for the Clio V6. It really kind of gave people an indication of what you were driving. And next up, now that we've seen Renault created this wide body car by sticking a body on top of a body, you may be wondering why they did that. What was the point of making it wide body? Was it just to look cool? And the answer is no. There are several reasons why this car needed a wider body than the regular Clio. The most obvious is the engine. The engine is now back here. It takes up a lot of space, and so do all the components meant to transfer power to the rear wheels, since the regular Clio is front engine and front wheel drive. And that stuff is going to need a lot of room back here, which is one reason it needs the wider body. Another one is air intake. The car needs to get air into the engine somehow. It can't be using the front grille anymore since the engine's no longer in front, so there are massive air intakes built into the wide body. You can see them on both sides of the car, and they help bring air into the engine, and so you needed a wider body to make room for those air intakes. You also want a wider body for a car like this to fit wider tires. This car has more power. It's kind of notoriously a bit of a handful to drive. You want as much grip as you can possibly get, and that means as wide of tires as you can possibly get. And the regular Clio's tires are probably very small, so to get wider tires on, you need a wider body to accommodate them. So it's not just for looks, although it does look cool. Even though I know it's just a body stuck on another body, I think it looks awesome nonetheless. And next up, some other quirks and features here. Some very interesting things happen when you add a wide body to a car that wasn't designed for it. I'm going to start with the fuel door. You open up the fuel door with a key, and you can see it is a very deep fuel door, and the fuel filler is set very far into the car. That's because this is the regular fuel door placement from the regular Clio. So when you open the fuel door, you're putting fuel through both the regular body and the wide body, and so it looks a lot deeper than you might expect in a normal fuel door. Same thing with the keyhole on the outside of this car. You can see it's not flush up against the body because that's where the body kit is. Instead, it's a little bit inset because they just used the regular door keyhole from the regular Clio, and so the elevation difference there is the body kit to the actual Clio's door. Probably my favorite quirk that's come out of this is the door handle. You can see the regular Clio just has exposed door handles. You walk up, you open the door, no big deal. But this, the door handles are covered by the body kit. But what they've done is just keep the regular Clio door handle under the cover of this body kit, and you just walk up and open it all the same, except now you're reaching into the air intake that is created by this wide body kit on the outside of this car. Kind of interesting. And next up, since we're talking about interesting exterior items on the Clio V6, two others I thought worth mentioning. One, the wheels. I love these OZ racing wheels that the Clio V6 had. These were the factory wheels. They look amazing. I think this wheel design was absolutely perfect for this car. It helped give it that muscular, exciting look that the wide body also gave it, and I just think these wheels are so good on the Clio V6. I also love something that all Clio models from this era had, and that is how you open the tailgate, which is a pretty neat thing. You have this little plastic piece back here, which is a combination of a keyhole, as you can see, or you push the keyhole and that pops the tailgate open, and this plastic piece is also the lifter that you use to lift up the tailgate. All three of those things in one, which is kind of cool. But the placement of this thing meant that the license plate light couldn't be right here on the center, on the top like it normally is, and so instead Renault relocated the license plate light to the bottom in the bumper pointing upwards, which is kind of a distinctive element of the Clio from behind. They all were like this, and you see a bottom mounted license plate mount and you think Renault Clio. It was a distinctive design touch of this particular car. But anyway, next we climb inside the Clio V6, and to do that you step over this massive door sill, incredibly wide, huge door sill, although it's a bit deceptive because it too is just a piece of body kit tacked on to the regular Clio body. So you have the Clio door sill and then an extra Clio V6 door sill to match up with the wide body on the outside, and you can clearly see the seam here probably better than any other place on the body kit where they've placed the V6 body kit, just kind of stuck it to the regular Clio body. Very interesting to see that with the door open. But anyway, climbing inside this car, one thing you'll immediately notice is there are fewer interior changes in here than there are exterior changes. With the exception, of course, of the removal of the seats and the addition of a V6 to the interior. But other than that, there are not that many changes inside compared to how the body looks on the outside, which is so distinctive. For instance, the steering wheel, one of the first things you see when you get in, this is not a high-performance mid-engine rear-wheel drive car steering wheel. It just looks like a crappy plastic Renault Clio steering wheel, because that's what it is. And as you look all around this interior, that feeling is reinforced pretty much everywhere you're looking. Every surface is kind of cheap plastic, doesn't really look all that nice, looks like a cheap French economy car, which of course this was at its most basic form. With that said, there are a few notable changes in here for the Renault Sport Clio V6 compared to the regular model. One is the gear lever. You can see it's got an Alcantara shift boot, which looks very nice, and it has this silver shift knob at the top and this silver base with these rivets around it. It looks a lot better than whatever cheap thing they were installing in the regular Clio. You also have Alcantara on the door panel. This surface here, again, looks pretty nice, looks like you might expect it in a more expensive sporty car. And you had new seats in this car that were sportier and more aggressively bolstered than what you got in a regular Clio. Plus it said Renault Sport on the back, emphasizing that this was the performance version. That was, and maybe still is, like Renault's sporty performance line at the time. These seats aren't incredibly bolstered like you'd get in a GT3 or some other sports car, but they were more aggressive, sportier seats than a regular French economy car from the time. One last interior change to make this car more exciting, you had a plaque mounted between the seats that actually gave an individual number of which Clio this is. Like I said, they made about 3,000 of these total over like a 4-year production run. Not many of these cars on the road, but this is one of them. In fact, it's number 408. But anyway, aside from those changes to make this car more sporty and exciting on the inside, everything else in here was, like I said, kind of basic French economy car. For instance, there's only one dome light in this interior, not two, one for each side, and there's only one reading light in this interior, although it's movable, so you can turn it on and the passenger can read or the driver can read, but they cannot read at the same time. You can also see the gauge cluster in here, pretty basic affair. It's been updated for the Renault Sport model with a higher top speed and probably a higher RPMs, but it still has this kind of cheap, basic, simple French economy car font that doesn't really look very sporty or exciting. But anyway, since I've covered a general tour of this interior and all the Clio V6 upgrades, I also want to go over the quirks, because ultimately this is a French car, so there are some quirks, starting with the horn situation, which is bizarre. On the steering wheel, you have these little buttons for the horn. You press them, the horn sounds, as you can hear. That's fairly standard. But you also have a horn button at the end of the turn signal stalk right here, and you press that and the horn sounds as well. Why did you need a button there and buttons 4 inches away on the steering wheel, all to do the same thing? Nobody knows, but you had it. Different choices for how you could press the horn in this car. And speaking of the steering wheel and the stalks, how about over on the wiper stalk, the intermittent wiper adjustment? There are so many different levels of intermittent wiper. There's like 20 different intermittent wiper selections that you can choose from, just in case you want it to go a little faster, a little slower, a little faster. You have that option here. Next up, another quirk I like, in the center console, right in front of the gear lever, you have this giant lock-unlock button, absolutely huge. Top is lock, and the bottom, the doors are open, but really that's just unlock, and you press that to lock or unlock the car. Next up, you don't have any cup holders in here, unfortunately, nowhere to put cups, but if you open up the glove box, you can see there are crappy little plastic molded cup holders stuck to the inside of the glove box lid. You would never actually want to use those cup holders for anything, but they are there as sort of an attempt at cup holders, just in case you didn't have very strong cup holder demands, but you wanted something. And next up, how about this as a bizarre French car quirk? When you turn on the car, instead of displaying the odometer reading, it tells you that the oil level is okay, and it does that for many seconds after you start the car, until finally it goes away eventually and shows you the odometer reading. I can't imagine why it can't can't show both. I think they did this only to annoy service advisors at car dealerships. When you pull in for service and they got to check the mileage, they'd have to start the car and wait and wait and wait until they get the mileage. What an annoyance, and what a bizarre French car quirk. And next up, another bizarre French car quirk on the radio. Every time you press a button, it beeps. Take a listen to this. Yes, that seems annoying, and it is. You want to change the preset? Beep. You want to change the volume? Beep. You want to change the radio station? Beep. Everything you do, the radio will beep at you, which is tremendously annoying. And speaking of kind of annoying, this car, obviously being French, was originally made as a left-hand drive car. This example is probably exported from the United Kingdom, so it's a right-hand drive version, but Renault doesn't really respect right-hand drive, I would guess. The hood release for this car is not in the driver's side footwell. Instead, it's in the passenger side footwell, which is the left-hand drive orientation for a hood release. They didn't bother to move it over to the driver's side footwell, so your passenger has access to the hood release at any moment. And so those are the quirks and features of the Renault Sport Clio V6. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Clio V6. I have always wanted to drive this car ever since I first found out about it. Now, you might be wondering why Renault made a mid-engine rear-wheel drive hatchback. Believe it or not, this wasn't the only one they made. They also created a few in the 80s, maybe even the late 70s. It was sort of like a thing they did, but I think it ended with this car. There weren't any more mid-engine hatchbacks. Not a lot of demand, but this car has kind of attained legendary status in the years since it was built. It's a special and interesting vehicle for sure. Now, 230 horsepower might not seem like all that much to you, but it is a big number, especially for a European hot hatchback at this time. You know, GTIs in this era made like 170, 180 horsepower. A lot of other hot hatchbacks were in that range, maybe 150, and none of them had V6s. To put a V6 in a hot hatchback, then make it mid-engine, then widen it, it was a ridiculous car, and it still is. So first thing you know when you get in here, you start it and you hear the engine. And you hear it in here, and it's like, oh, this is gonna be something interesting. All right, so a little confession, I have been driving the car for a little bit before I started to roll the cameras, and I'm already kind of enamored with it. I love factory wide bodies, and this car is unusually quick. I was expecting it to be kind of slow. 0 to 60 in the low sixes doesn't seem all that quick, but it kind of moves. Woo! Now, I want to say something about this car. They warned me before I drove it, and I've read stories. It's heavy in back, and it's light in front. And especially as you get going fast, as I just did, car kind of squats down in back, a lot of weight back there, not a lot of weight up front. Mid-engine, I've always felt, is sort of the perfect design for a sports car. But this car, by virtue of having all its weight in the back, even though the engine is technically in the middle, it feels like a kind of heavy rear engine car. And I bring this up because it's a little funky to drive with a lot of weight back in the back and not much up front. Porsches do a good job of balancing it, but they were built to take that design. This car was built to be a front-engine, front-wheel drive hatchback. They just stuck the engine in the middle, made 3,000 of these and said good luck. And you can feel the front end feeling very light and the steering not quite being as connected as you want when you're really getting going. But to me, that only adds to the appeal of this car because I like the kind of dangerous sort of widowmaker mystique that this car has. But I think for a lot of people, and especially if you're expecting like a traditional hot hatch drive, it's not like that. It's a little squirrely in the front. Just at whatever speed I'm going, 60 miles an hour, you make a little bit of a lane change and you can feel you're not getting the feedback that you expect up there. It's light and it feels like it might be able to get away from you pretty quick. And there are a lot of stories of a lot of accidents with these cars. And I completely understand why within my first 20 minutes behind the wheel. But I do want to say it is quick. This car feels fast. I was really underestimating it when I've always kind of been interested in this car and I didn't really know what kind of power it made. And when I went to write the script for this, 230 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 6, I don't know. Is it that fast? Well, yeah, it feels quick. Maybe because the engine's right here, it makes a lot of noise, you're low, you're in a tiny car, like I said, smaller than a Mini Cooper, but this thing feels fun and fun to push around. But I gotta say, I'm a little intimidated by it, just because of the steering feel is so much different. A Mini is so like perfectly composed, and you get such fantastic steering. This, you kind of got to know what you're doing in kind of a cool way though. But I feel like, 2 or 3 autocrosses and I'd be the master of this car, and it'd be a lot of fun. Now, in terms of values, I'm not really sure what these are going for right now, but I really expect values will start to shoot up as these cars become a little bit older and thus legal for Americans to import. This is a very special car. It's numbered with the individual plaque, and I really think that this car is going to be sought after to import by Americans once it turns 25. Now, speaking of that, you might be wondering how I am driving this here because it is not 25 years old. The Lane Motor Museum has a special exemption with the show or display law that allows them to import cars for museum and educational purposes as long as they are showing or displaying them, which is of course exactly what we're doing right now. And so there it is. That's the Renault Sport Clio V6. This car is amazing. I love hot hatchbacks, and this one is particularly special. It combines the perfect balance and weight distribution of a mid-engine sports car with the subtlety and some of the practicality of a high-performance hatchback. It's incredible. This is likely one of the only ones of these in North America, and I'm thrilled that I had the chance to check it out. Anyway, now it's time to give the Clio V6 a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 52 out of 100, which places the Clio V6 here against some other similar cars. Although truthfully, there aren't really any other similar cars to this one, given its rather unusual nature. The Clio score is impressive. It gets a 30 in the weekend categories, which ties big names like the Mitsubishi 3000 GT VR4 and the E46 BMW M3. And it beats out the Euro E36 M3, which is a serious car. The Clio is let down in the daily categories, though, as it's not particularly practical, and quality is a bit of a challenge, especially finding parts here in North America. Still, what a cool car, and kind of a scary one.